Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I can read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. Today, we have Gabby's letter. Gabby wants to talk about her experience with Damian. Let us get straight into it. So, Gabby writes, I have a history with avoidant men who always eventually friend zone me. Early 2023, my fearful avoidant ex of 1.5 years left monkey branched and triangulated me with a woman who stalked me online ever since. Yuck. By last November, I was over it entirely. I had also seriously worked on my anxious attachment style. Then I met Damian, who's 38, a psychologist, and a friend's colleague, and felt exhilarated. Both of us had sworn off dating apps, and our friend set us up. Damien wasn't my usual type, but he had a fun, playful energy. Oh, that fun, playful energy. Jesus. Just want to take a moment here to say, if you're ever experiencing fun, playful energy, beware, because it can usually be a sign of some arrested development. Because, you got to think about it like, where's that youthful energy coming from? Oh, that's right. Those wounded 5, 6, 8, 10, 12-year-olds that are a lot of fun for a short time, not for a long time. Anyways, our first dates went on for 6 to 8 hours. Jesus. We shared similar experiences working and traveling in Australia and Asia, burnouts in our late 20s, seeking stable companionship, etc. We had a compatible sense of humor and were talkative, so the conversation flowed. We met often and each night apart had long phone calls, and whilst together, we'd gasp for air while laughing and talking until 4 a.m. because neither of us could shut up. I've had those experiences, they're fun and cute. Our birthdays were also 2 days apart, which was also a convenient consequence. Apparently, Damien looked happier at work, and our friend was thrilled that she'd introduced us. All right, let's talk about the first couple of paragraphs before we dive straight in. So, we already know that for Gabby, she's already got a history and she's aware of it, which is wonderful. So, got to give Gabby massive credit where it's due, which is the fact that she knows that there's a pattern of being with men who are avoidantly attached, who friend zone her, right? So, tick, good knowledge from her side. Secondly, we know that this is a person who's been working on their anxious attachment style for a while, right? So, I'm assuming that Damien is probably also someone who's avoidantly attached. I could be very wrong. We don't know how the rest of the story will go. But this might be another example of what I call unfinished business, which means there's obviously a lot more going on underneath the surface as to why this is happening. Because when these repeated experiences happen time and time again, and trust me, it takes a while to heal from. You can be in therapy sometimes and you'll be like, and it comes to the surface, years in, and you're like, oh, now
I see what this is and I can start working on it. So it is one of those things where I'd say life has a funny way of giving us these experiences until we get to a point where we heal it. And that can happen some ways into a healing journey as well, too. Anyways, that's my prediction. Just saying, could happen. But let's get back into it. All right. Let's talk about where Gabby's at. She writes, unlike in my past relationships, my nervous system stayed calm. Also, our bed chemistry wasn't magical initially, but I figured it would improve. And it did, for a while. Damien didn't like cuddling as we slept, though, which seemed slightly avoidant. He said it would get too hot, which I thought was fair enough. But he would also turn his back on me. Okay, I just want to say really quickly, um, that's a thing. I know a lot of people look for so much certainty in these experiences. Where are the red flags? Am I anxious? Because if I'm anxious, that means they're not good for me. Wrong. Often these experiences can often be starting out with a lot of calmness to them sometimes. There can be the euphoria. I mean, we've already got like dates that are going for 6 to 8 hours, the phone calls till 4 in the morning. Like, I mean, we've already got a lot of intensity here. And it sounds like two children, if you will, teenagers who are having a great time. I know these people are in their 20s, I get that. But I really feel that energy of like very young love in this experience. And hey, we've all been there at one point or another. It's hot, so I get it. But yeah, I suspect that it's one of those things where I think for people like Gabby, they might think, oh, well, how do you spot this? It's like often you can't until you're some ways in. And eventually you get to a point where energetically you will just be like, I don't even need to know red flags. I can spot this a mile away. But, anyways, such is the passage of time and the wisdom of experience. Anyways, I didn't think much of the fact that Damien had ended all his short relationships, never finding a deeper connection. Now, in his early 20s, he didn't do relationships to avoid difficult emotions. Based on what our mutual friend had told me, he'd pursued unavailable types before meeting me, occasionally ruminating about them at work. However, my personal dating history is also fragmented as I've lived in multiple countries during my 20s and suffered from debilitating symptoms of PMDD and ADHD until getting diagnosed at 28. I am sorry that you've gone through that, Gabby. That sounds like it's been bloody intense. And whilst I'm not someone who is familiar too much with PMDD, I know that ADHD, when it's on the upper end of the scale, can be absolutely debilitating for so many people as well. Anyways, after 7 years of therapy, I can safely say I've worked on myself and feel like a different person than I was in my late 20s. Phenomenal. That's amazing. I told Damien about my PMDD early on, and he took it well. My previous ex had gaslit and shamed me for the symptoms. That's terrible. So I stayed cautious about opening up at a deeper level. Fair enough. That makes a lot of sense. I didn't feel rushed to make us official after 6 weeks of knowing each other. But since we were planning to spend the holidays together, Damien asked to introduce me to his family as his girlfriend. I said yes, it felt natural. Honestly, that's beautiful. He also met my extended family and friends who liked him instantly and said he was a keeper. We gave each other gift cards to fancy restaurants as Christmas presents and we're enjoying them together later. Oh, this is cute. No, like, this is really sweet. In the beginning of the year, we did a lot together. Now, Damien's work contract ended in mid-January, and I'm writing my master's thesis, and we had many slow mornings together, drinking coffee and reading. We also went ice swimming, attended yoga classes, and visited his father's country house for a couple of days, which was great. I'm envious. This is sounding really hot. This is sounding really good. On our way there, we ate at IKEA and talked about eventually moving in together and getting a dog. There was also a plan of going on a holiday to Italy later in spring. Now, at the end of January, Damien told our friend and other former colleagues he was happy in our relationship. And around that time, I started having odd dreams about him, always feeling hollow or abandoned. Oof. But I forgot them right after waking. I also noticed he seemed more distant during sex. It had become less regular and eventually more about his pleasure than mine. I thought I'd bring it up to him eventually, as I'd felt we'd had plenty of time to work on it. All right, I'm going to take a moment here, Gabby, to mention something that's a bit woo, so bear with me. And I'm also going to bring it into mental health terms as well. We'll start with the mental health stuff. I am a big, big, big believer that we should not be underestimating the power of our dreams and nightmares. As someone who frequently has dreams and nightmares, I keep a dream journal to find out what the heck is going on and the emotions attached to them because sometimes it's a very good indicator of what's going on subconsciously for us. And I recommend that for a lot of you, if you are people who have a lot of dreams, write them down if you can, first thing when you get up in the morning, because it's really important to be able to record some of that because it can often tell us of things that are coming up for us that, might be things that we need to process in our own time or with a therapist. Secondly, from a more woo perspective, I find a lot of people who have vision, sight, if you will, like they're able to be very clairvoyant or mediums, tend to have very predictive dreams and also be very good at seeing things in ways that other people can't. I, for me, am like bloody good with energy reading. I can, see energy and feel energy from a mile away with a lot of people. It's not hyper attunement. There's a difference between being hyper vigilant and worried about stepping on eggshells and also not setting people off. That's a trauma response. But when you're able to like read the energy and things, that's a very different story. So I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole because that's not for everyone. But the point is simply to say, don't dismiss these things if they ever come up because it's very important. You've already had an indicator that there's a feeling of, sorry, that you've got images of being hollow with Damian and also abandonment from the sounds of it, which is pretty intense. So to me, when I see that, sorry, when I read this, it makes me think, you know, this is sounding to me like there's a lot of what I'm feeling from this is that there's big disconnection in Damien. And I also feel like there's also a bit of a prediction of him potentially leaving you as well. And it's funny, I don't know if any of you have noticed this, but if you've ever dated someone like a significant ex, right? If you've ever dated someone who was majorly avoidant, and then you go on to date someone who's very similar like them, often the body remembers and it will often give you clues being like, this guy, girl, person feels very similar to my last lover. What's going on? This feels very familiar. And unfortunately, if it's familiar, chances are it's going to be more of the same if you don't pay attention to the signs. So just want to point that out as it's very important. Anyways, in early February, we went on a short trip abroad, and I hadn't told him I loved him yet, but I felt like I would soon. The trip was great, but on our second night at a restaurant, the dinner was mediocre, and Damien was rude to the waiter, sounding unexpectedly arrogant. The moment haunted us both afterwards, and as he blurted out the comment without meaning it. It was PMDDing at that point, and his comment felt like a slap on my face. I felt a short disconnect with him, but didn't know how to voice it. I thought I was just being hypersensitive in that moment. Oh no. That's a very real thing, isn't it? Like, it's amazing how there's two things I want to say to this. I feel like language is so important in these experiences, and many people don't appreciate how important, sometimes having these words to describe what's going on. And so, I could imagine that, hearing that was obviously very triggering and upsetting, and also made you probably have a bit of like maybe it was a bit re-traumatizing in a way from previous exes that you'd had, and also maybe given a bit of cognitive dissonance because it's like, who is this guy that I've just been going out with for quite a while? Like, where did this side come out? The other thing I was going to say too, which is attached to this point before I talk about my second point, is um, often, unfortunately, this is when the more unsavory stuff starts to come out, right? Like you can be dating someone who's amazing, and you only start to see the less savory stuff time in. I know a lot of people will love to say, "Didn't you see the red flags?" I got to tell you, sometimes those red flags are things that we don't even recognize until after the fact. So, yeah, not your fault. Now, the second thing I wanted to say. Um, Sometimes from an energetic perspective, we don't often have words to describe what we're experiencing, but we just have an inner knowing of being like, this guy is pulling away, or this guy is distant, or this guy is too needy. There's like a dependency vibe here. And it can be very hard to put that into language to say, I'm feeling this with what's going on here. Because we know a lot of these individuals, particularly that don't have, let's just say, the healthiest of egos, can take that well. And a lot of people be like, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. But it's unlike, unfortunately, energy never lies. And we can often feel when there's something energetically going on that maybe even the person themselves doesn't even realize. So That's a hard thing to go through. I've had that experience recently where I've noticed there is some energetically I could feel like there's something not quite right with this person who's presenting really well, but it's hard to recognize that, particularly in a world where we look at things on the surface and we try and find a logical reason as to why we're feeling a certain way. A skill that I hope a lot of you develop is understanding that, sometimes we will feel things deep down inside of us, even if everything on paper looks hunky-dory. And it's good to be aware of that. Anyways, I don't think you're being hypersensitive, Gabby. The following day at lunch, Damien talked about his strict discipline, shaped by his childhood. Oh dear. His parents divorced when he was 9, and his mother hadn't taken it well. He described those years as quite chaotic at home, which had led to his need to feel in control. Oh. He's very irregular with everything in his life, goes to the gym often, to bed early, etc. I can be somewhat less regular, especially during luteal phase. Sometimes I overindulge, but overall, I'm still active and consider myself pretty healthy. I just don't want to be too hard on myself. So, something to know about a lot of trauma survivors when they have like a discipline, it's one thing to be disciplined, and it's another thing to have what I almost call like a rhythmic routine for self-soothing. So, the way I see it with Damien is that he's probably someone who uses his discipline to self-soothe a lot of his own trauma. So what this means is that he probably has a lot of internal stuff going on that's really quite chaotic for him. And his way of self-soothing is to have like a routine which he just follows like clockwork. I wouldn't be surprised if he's someone like the regular coffee drinker of a morning because he suffers from anxiety and he can't sleep very well. And he just goes from one thing to the next. So it's one of those things that when you're in the high functioning freeze, you just go, 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 go to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing to self-manage a lot of that internal distress. That's my prediction of what's going on here. Anyways, back at the ferry, we'd concluded the trip, which had been amazing. Damien came to my place for the night, and the next day we went for lunch at my grandfather's place. Then Damien went home. Now, that weekend, I was busy with a documentary festival and had felt a bit distant from Damien, but nothing seemed wrong. Of course, we'd been apart for days earlier with no issues. On Friday, I went to sleep too late and felt tired on Saturday, which I told Damien, who joined me in one of his screenings. I was still going to the gym and also to another screening. He asked me if I'd eaten that day. I said I'd only eaten lunch, but had kind of forgotten to eat afterwards. And he said, Gabby, you really have to sort out the basics in life. That annoyed me. I'd already become much more regular, both with my sleep and eating, while with him. Not for him, but for myself. He just made it easier due to the way in which he managed his routine. Now, I didn't say much and kissed him goodbye to go to the gym. While there, I texted a friend voicing concerns about being too quote unquote irregular for Damien. I also realized I wasn't feeling that confident about confessing my love to him, as something made me think he wouldn't say it back. Wow, you're very intuitive. Very intuitive. Also, I know in these sort of circumstances, we tell people, look, you should be addressing your concerns with your partner before talking it out with a third party. But the fact that you did that makes me think you didn't feel confident talking to him about this at all, which is not a criticism to you, Gabby, but it's more of a statement of saying you obviously didn't feel safe with him. He obviously doesn't feel safe. He obviously feels like someone who you don't feel comfortable with talking to him about this stuff. So you had to talk about a friend because it obviously made you feel it made you understandably feel insecure, which is a very valid response off the back of that. And I don't think that his comment obviously was kind in any way at all. It sounds like it really hurt. So I'm sorry that you felt annoyed by what he said because it's not okay. But yeah, you wouldn't have done that if, you know, put it this way, you would have more likely, you know, let that be as it were, um, unless that triggered you. And it sounds to me like that really did hurt. You would have brought it up with him, is what I wanted to say. You would have brought it up with him directly if you felt like you could. And it sounds like there's something in his demeanor which doesn't make you feel confident to say that, let alone, I love you. Because at this stage, it sounds like things are feeling a little bit wobbly. Anyways, I'm intuitive. Yeah, you are. I am. I completely agree. You are intuitive. I'm intuitive and assume this was when he started to deactivate. Yep. I took a mirror selfie since he suspected I'd even go to the gym and sent it to him. That felt instantly cringe and needy, but I gave myself grace because I really felt like that with him. In the morning, I only received great with a thumb up and also a reasoning from him that he needed space. Oh, wait, no, sorry. Start that sentence again. In the morning, I only received great with a thumbs up, and I reasoned he needed space, so I didn't call him before evening after seeing three more films. Oh God. I don't know about anyone here. I don't like when people give those one word reactions to things because it can come across as very passive aggressive at times. So, yeah, not a fan. Damien called me just when I was about to call him, and I told him about the documentaries. He also asked me to join him to meet him on, sorry, to meet a friend on Friday, and I asked him to join me and my friends to play badminton, which he agreed to. We also booked a restaurant table for the same Friday, Valentine's Day, and talked about how his mum's birthday was coming up, which I was also invited to within 2 weeks. And nothing seemed odd about that phone call. On Monday, I felt a bit jittery for no clear reason. I thought it was thesis related stress, so when he called that night, I suggested we meet on Tuesday instead. He said it would be better for him too, and that he would call me later that night. I then hyper focused on an online project. When I saw he was trying to call, I decided to call him back in a bit, so I didn't pick up. An hour went by. He had texted me to say he was going to sleep, hoped I'd had a good day, and that he was really looking forward to seeing me. I replied saying I was sorry I missed the call and wrote I already missed him. I already have a funny feeling where this is going. So, oh dear, let's see what happens next. I felt bad because this had only happened once before. Now, a few weeks earlier, I'd run out of battery for hours while at a nail salon and suddenly felt highly anxious knowing he'd been waiting to hear from me. I charged my phone and it was 10 p.m. when I finally left the salon and called him. He sounded a little distant and I apologized. The whole thing was forgotten by the next day. Now, things like that happen, so I knew I shouldn't feel bad. Besides, our calls and texts were mostly very consistent. On Tuesday, when I woke up, I saw Damien had reached to my message with a kiss emoji. Now, as agreed, he came to mine that evening. When he arrived, he immediately burst into tears, saying he was extremely sad. I asked if something bad had happened, and he said no, so I immediately knew what was coming. I made us some tea and comforted him. While still crying, he admitted that he only oh, fucking hell. He admitted that he only saw me as a friend. I caught his eye properly for the first time that night and noticed that he looked alarmed, almost scared, like a little child. Yeah, he's not. So that those tears, he sounds to me like he's really scared to be in that situation of confrontation. Secondly, I don't think that he truly sees you as a friend. I think he's starting to shut down. And I think, as you describe him like a little child, that is such his emotional age when he's having this meltdown with you too. Take a moment here to understand this. We are talking about a psychologist here, right? On the surface, this is a man who should know about mental health, right? He should know about attachment theory. He should know about trauma. Let this be a important point for a lot of us. Not that, Gabby seems to have struggled with this, but let this be just a very gentle reminder for people that, as someone who's also been going through this myself lately, we are all, every professional out there, affected by our trauma. Mental health professionals are no exception to this rule. Should we have an understanding of this? Absolutely. Do a lot of us? No. Are a lot of us working on it? Oh, yeah. Are a lot of us not? Unfortunately, so. I can't speak for Damien if he's getting therapy or even doing supervision as a psychologist, but I will tell you that, for him to regress that badly suggests to me it's not sounding like he's done a lot of consistent work on himself. Anyways, we talked and cried for hours. He told me I should never once think I'd done something wrong and that he really wanted to keep me in his life as a friend after first giving me the space I would need. I told him I'd wanted to tell him I love him for a while, and he just cried and said, oh no, oh no, no. Okay. He's shame spiraling hard. So, with relationship obsessive compulsive disorder, we often see people have really nasty inner critics. And one of the many, I guess, thoughts that the inner critic can come up with is you're just going to harm, in this case, Gabby, by sticking it out with her. You don't really love her. If you don't do this now, she's going to find out that you've led her along and she's not going to be happy, right? So there's this real need to protect image and protect face and not to cause any shame for yourself when you have ROCD as an avoidant attacher. So I imagine that his inner critic is going ballistic and he's feeling like such a shit human being because part of him never wanted this to happen. Now, on the surface, it reads like, he's just realized, oh, I don't want to be, I just see you as a friend. Something tells me no. I don't think it's as simple as that. I don't think it's a case of him seeing you only as a friend, Gabby. But this is a very consistent theme, like I said, with unfinished business, where you're technically being friend zoned yet again by an avoidant man. And it does make me wonder, okay, if I was your counselor, how does this make you feel? What does this remind you of? Where do you feel there's anybody? All the usual IFSC sort of questions. But it is just to say, this is clearly unfinished business. And to me, this is something where it's like, this has happened too many times for it to be a coincidence. Anyways, doesn't, but in saying that, I also want to say, I am so sorry you had that experience. This guy was spending 6 to 8 hour dates with you. You were chatting till 4 in the morning and he thinks you're just a friend? Fuck off. That's not what's going on. I'm really sorry that you've gone through this because it sounds to me like he's letting his own inner demons win, if you will. This is so not okay. Before making his decision, Damien had been waking for hours on Monday and Tuesday and opened up to his mother, who had been sad to hear he wanted to break up with me. I briefly worried my PMDD symptoms might have affected his decision. No, I don't think they have, but I can understand why you said that. I'd been on luteal for almost 2 weeks and thought I'd given off more of a neutral vibe than usual. He assured me that PMDD wasn't an issue and he'd barely noticed any difference in me. When asked, he said I'd never acted distant or inconsistent, nor had I made him feel inadequate, which he'd felt in his previous relationships. I want to make it clear, whilst I'm no expert in PMDD by any stretch of the imagination, you being slightly neutral is not the basis for someone to break up with you straight away. A much healthier approach from Damien would, if that was the case, if it truly was the case, would have been him to come up and say, "Hey, babe, I've noticed you've been more distant, cold, whatever it may be. Can we talk about it?" Not, "Oh yeah, I decided to dump you because you were more neutral than late." Like, fuck off. To be honest, like, I understand where that thinking is coming from, and I understand that you're assuming that the fault might lie with you. I'm here to tell you, based on this, it's not. I think this has a lot to do with his own internal insecurities and a lot of his own stuff. But I can understand, that we often do look for these things as evidence for thinking maybe it was in my control. Unfortunately, this aspect is not something you have control over. All right. When asked, he said I'd never acted distant or inconsistent, nor had I made him feel inadequate, which he'd felt in his previous relationships. Yeah, it sounds like you've done a fantastic job. So it's interesting that the man with a history of short relationships is once again, short of a relationship. He said something that should have been there after 3 months of dating was missing. He had realized he felt similar with me than in the company of his closest friends. Waiting to feel something deeper wouldn't be fair to me or himself. Okay. We are now getting into some sort of ambiguous waters. So this is where I think the power of intuition is going to be you know, the judge and jury over a situation like this. On the surface, we could look at this a few ways. Could this be a case if he truly just saw her as a friend and he never really had feelings for her? I actually had one of my very first clients came in with a case like this, and I wrote it off in my head thinking, no, I just think this is a case that he just didn't like you that much. It was just a friend. However, even though this can happen, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. There is too much other stuff here that makes me think this is more than just friendship. And ROCD is notorious for making avoidance feel unsatisfied, perpetually unsure of whether or not they're actually in the right relationship. And some of them feel like they need more spark, chemistry, fireworks, a Disney experience, if you will. And so to me, if he feels like it's this experience of what he's getting is the same as what he's getting with best friends, something to me is making me think that's like I'm already raising some eyebrows and making me think I actually just don't think he knows what love is and how it feels. That's one guess that I have here. The other thing too is for a lot of people who genuinely don't have feelings for someone they've gone out with, they're not really going to feel anything. And to me, it suggests that he actually does have a degree of feelings for you. But I can speak from my own experience, even though I'm not avoidantly attached, and say, when I've not felt it, I've not felt it. To me, this seems like something else. I am suspecting ROCD is to blame. And I can also say, too, confidently, when I've not had feelings for someone, it has been pretty easy in some of those circumstances to be like, look, I'm not feeling it, goodbye. But we are talking about someone who sounds like they have an avoidant attachment here. So it could be a case that there is ROCD. There is also fear of conflict coming up. I could be wrong. This guy could genuinely not have feelings for Gabby, but there's just something here that just doesn't feel right. I do feel like this is another avoidant case based on Gabby's history. Anyways, I also want to say that whole this feeling should have been there after 3 months of dating, and it would be a mistake to basically wait for something deeper to emerge, and it wouldn't be fair to you or to himself. I feel like this is very sort of self-righteous unilateral decision making coming from him. Like, sure, I just I will speak from my own experience and say I never did dates and holidays sort of like this when I didn't like someone that much. I was just, if anything, I was like, it was about a month in and I was like, this isn't working for me. So no, yeah, I'm not agreeing with this, and I don't like the way he's done this. Anyways, it was 1 a.m. when we finished the talk. He stayed the night. I tossed and turned the whole night. In the morning, we still talked and joked normally. At one point, he said he hoped that I would meet someone in real life, as online dating sucks, like in a supermarket, which really stung. It seemed early to say something like that, I agree. He's such a people pleaser too. He should have just walked at that particular point. Like it's so not okay that he stuck around like that. He clearly felt like such a bad person and he felt like he needed to make you feel better. Not okay. I've had avoidant men do this and it's just like fuck off. Um, he returned my key and I returned his. And we agreed he'd return my stuff and pick up his a bit later. We both cried when he left. Yeah, something tells me that if he really didn't have any feelings for you, that this wouldn't have happened. Something just, this just doesn't feel right to me. That evening, I sent him a letter repeating things I'd said in the breakup conversation, adding I'd still be open to being a couple and trying to communicate more deeply. A week later, I had hardly agreed with that sentence, but didn't regret the letter. Good on you. 4 days went by. Then I called him and said I missed him. He said it back, but couldn't explain what was missing from the relationship. When I pointed out he'd seemed dysregulated on Tuesday, he explained he had panicked after realizing the romantic feelings weren't there and wouldn't necessarily come. Yet this had been his best relationship. He'd never laughed like that with anyone. We both cried. I told him he would soon receive a letter I'd written, which made him cry more. We didn't talk for a few days until he texted and said he could pick up his stuff that weekend. When he did, we talked for an hour. I eventually asked about the letter. He'd read it and said it had been a beautiful gesture and it was good I'd got it out on paper. We both became teary eyed again and discussed it further and changed the subject. Before he left, we hugged each other and cried. Just, this isn't feeling right to me. Like, the vibe I'm getting, I'm like, no, something doesn't feel right with this. Like, when you truly don't like someone, you wouldn't do this. Now, again, let's play devil's advocate, right? Let's just say Damian truly doesn't like Gabby, emotionally speaking, right? He might, out of a distorted sense of obligation, be still, trying to lay her down gently, so to speak, and, make out like it wasn't her fault, it was him, and to make her feel better off the back of it. But this is now getting into some weird land. It's like, bro, just like let her just fucking grieve. Can you like go away now? Like to me, it just sort of feels like it's so messy. And the fact that it is so messy makes me think, what else is going on there emotionally? It makes me wonder if he's quite disconnected, hence the dream that Gabby had of him being hollow. Makes me think, I don't actually think he's connecting very much with his heart space and really able to, understand what love is, which makes me think that he actually doesn't have a clear concept of what joy is. So there's that. And then let's return to this. So, I mean, look, he could be in a situation where he may not genuinely have those romantic feelings for Gabby, but I raise my eyebrows over this and just think, no, this is disconnection vibes more than anything else. Anyways, Damien had forgotten to bring some of my stuff, which he brought to the city centre 3 days earlier. Sorry, 3 days later. We grabbed Jesus, you guys are still continuing to see each other after this. The situation had calmed down a bit emotionally. I probably still seemed a bit cool and distant, which I didn't want to, but I couldn't help it. Yeah, fair enough. I asked if he felt he was still avoiding these uncomfortable relationship-related feelings, like when he was younger. He admitted it could be to the case to some extent, but he'd come far forward with his inner work, though saying that out loud seemed uncomfortable. Yeah. Each morning I wake up thinking, how could he do this? But I'm coping somehow, focusing on graduating. Am I delusional to think I am not just a friend? He was the one who pursued me first. How can I prevent this in the future with someone else? Okay, Gabby, I'm glad you've asked these. These are sort of things that I've addressed and I want to talk about more in full. Firstly, I am so glad that you've brought this ambiguation ship to my attention, a word that I've come up with. It might be out there already. But anyways, for the purposes of talking about this, let me put it like this. This is a perfect example of when a experience is totally in question mark territory. On the surface, if we take the intuition stuff out of this, it could be a case that the guy, just genuinely didn't have romantic feelings for you and he truly felt like a friend. But even so, he's been fucking messy with you at the end, which makes me think this leads me to now talk about the emotional and even like the intuitive stuff. Part of me is just like, but he was so like into you at the beginning. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Like it just feels like, you know, he was really full on. And it makes me think he doesn't have any boundaries around this. He's got a lot of inner child stuff going on too that he needs to work on. It just makes me think that he's also quite disconnected from himself. And I mean, the guy's had a history of short relationships. It makes me think he can't connect. And so I worry that he actually, I just feel like this is unfinished business for both of you, if anything, but though for different reasons. Part of me is like, why does he still hang out with you if he doesn't have feelings for you? I don't hang out with people I don't have feelings for. So that's one thing. So it makes me feel like there's a sense of guilt, obligation, and he needs to hang around. There's that. But deeper than that, I'm like, but why Gabby? Like, this just makes me think, what the fuck is going on for Damien that he wants to still keep it out there? I still hold true to my belief that I think this is definitely an avoidance situation. Definitely not. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's as extreme as some of the story that I've read out, but it's still pretty fucking, it's a different kind of extreme. It's really confusing. And this is where you've unfortunately got to rely on your intuition to make sense of this. Intuitively, based on what I'm reading, this doesn't feel right to me. This doesn't, as someone who's been in similar situations, I'm not sensing this vibe at all. If anything, what I'm sensing is a case of I feel like there's some underlying stuff here that he's avoiding and he's not bringing to the table. And Damien isn't being 100% honest in this case. I think he did shut down. And we know that avoidants who enter the freeze lose feelings for partners. We know that people with attachment injury have a distorted understanding of what love is supposed to feel like. And it does make me think that he actually might be highly depressed and doesn't know how to connect to joy. We know, based on what Mike, a recovering fearful avoidant, has said on this podcast, that when you're miserable and you don't feel good about yourself and you have an insecure attachment, you will find ways to blow up relationships. So I am leaning more into that route, but it's ambiguous, and this is where it goes back into what I was saying earlier, which is sometimes we have to use the language of our intuition to make sense of a situation that doesn't maybe make sense at a on a material level. Now, am I delusional into thinking I'm not just a friend? No, I don't. I actually do think there's more to this. I don't think you were just a friend to him. And then you ask, how can I prevent this in the future with someone else? Okay, such a good question. So let's talk about your unfinished business briefly, because I'm not your counselor, but I can sort of share my insights. Basically, when you have a repeated experience happen to you again and again with people, places, work, whatever it may be, that causes you pain, re-traumatizes you, is, you know, basis of grief, it's basically an example of when we say, okay, there's something internally that's not resolved something yet, and it needs to be resolved. Otherwise, this is going to play out again and again and again and again. And in my experience of working through unfinished business in therapy, is I would actually strongly recommend you speak to a trauma-informed therapist with you on this. And you would need to unpack initially, like, okay, What is coming up for you when you're in these experiences? How do they make you feel? How does this relate to experiences you've gone through in childhood? The reason you do this is because there is some part of you, might be a young 5-year-old, 12-year-old, who is still trying to, for instance, you know, get validation from an absent father who never really appreciated or respected you, someone who has basically made you feel like you're not worthy of them, and they've never chosen you. That could be a big one as well too, a theme of not being chosen. And the reason that you need to work on that is because if that emotional wounding isn't fixed, it keeps unfortunately putting you in situations where more of that is going to happen again and again. I speak this from my own experience that life has a peculiar way of causing us to have these lessons again and again until we resolve it. And finding a new partner will not fix this. It'll help if the next partner is secure and actually treats you well, but this issue will happen again in some other way. You won't be chosen for a job promotion. You won't, or you'll be turned down for something with a friend because a best friend wants to, be with someone else. It's really this theme of, you are not being maybe chosen by someone, for what your efforts are to the table and being undervalued and maybe betrayed. And so those emotional experiences must be processed, journaling with a therapist, doing something like internal family systems therapy, for instance. And you need to find out, like, why does this part of you want this? What's it trying to achieve here? What is it trying to get out of this? Usually, a part of us that's not feeling chosen, might go back to people who continue not to choose us because that's what we've grown up with. For instance, people who choose emotionally unavailable people don't do it because they're consciously looking to get hurt. It's because that's all we know. We know that love is challenge. We know that love is, fighting to get the person to choose us. It's being with someone who can hold our emotional baggage because we don't want to deal with someone else's emotional baggage. It's, wanting to be able to feel, like we're having that teenage dream. There are so many themes and layers with this. It's never just one thing. And until those things, recognize it's a fool's errand to keep doing it, we'll keep doing it. Recently I was working with a client who was navigating how they kept going back to, people who used to treat them badly from school. Even though they were much older, they would still find themselves engaged with very emotionally mature, very, abusive people who were quite young. And they realized that there was a part of them that just wanted to be friends with these difficult people. And it was going back again and again and again to these difficult people. And it was about getting that part to recognize this was danger. This isn't healthy. This isn't good. We need to go elsewhere. But that part was just resisting that because it thought love was there, connection was there, friendship was there. We can make it work. So much of our internal stuff beneath the surface is really very much in the driver's seat for a lot of us, and we don't even realize it. So, I'm giving you a comprehensive answer because it requires a comprehensive approach. And it's not as simple as I'm going to wave a magical wand and everything's going to be okay. No. You want to speak to someone about it? I would highly recommend my teammate Kate Wynn, who works on this because this could be solved with something like root cause therapy. Well, I shouldn't say solved, I can't guarantee a result, but I could say you're likely to work on it more with someone like Kate on my team to work on this. But this is just to take a step back. Thank you so much for bringing this because I know you've written here friend zoned by by a fearful avoidant question mark. I would say definitely doesn't feel dismissive avoidant. I am going to say fearful on the basis that even though there wasn't really any major signs of his anxious attachment, I am feeling like I am getting trauma survivor vibes from him. And I don't think that he's someone, I mean, DA is technically a trauma survivors too, but there's just a lot of wounding here and disconnection that, like I said, that makes me think, I think we're in dismissive leaning, fearful, avoidant territory, or maybe even anxious leaning, fearful. It doesn't really matter. I definitely feel like this guy has got a fearful, avoidant attachment style. All right. Thank you, Gabby, for sharing this. This was a amazing letter to have for people who are in similar ambiguationships. And I really am grateful that you were able to share this with me today.